All right, so what do you think about this one?
It's pretty crazy, but there's not a lot of stuff on it.
Yeah, I found a bunch of stuff.
Okay, cool.
I
Found some. I got the original story and where it came from and stuff, but I couldn't find a lot more than that. There was.
So I had to go to like Yahoo search engine.
Yeah.
Because Google buries it.
Huh.
And then I
wasn't using
Bing
Google.
too.
I was using I was using Yahoo.
Yeah.
But I found some stuff, but I didn't find anything about that.
There's not a whole lot on it.
Yeah.
Like as far as like what it does, it's all
Right.
like speculation.
Yeah, like energy is what I got a lot of. I didn't see any of the conscious blocking stuff.
Yeah, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? You just like drool out of your mouth? You stare at it?
That's what I couldn't figure out. I'm like, are we in that state right now? How big's this thing's range?
Yeah, right. No doubt. Welcome to the podcast that explores mysterious disappearances, bizarre worldly occurrences, strange phenomenon, and basically everything that's weird. Welcome to the podcast, Everything That's Weird. We are your hosts, Brandon and Anthony, and tonight we have a very interesting topic.
World's oldest pyramid scheme.
You listen to those guys?
Yeah.
It's like everything they don't want you to know.
Right. Yeah.
Those guys
that was pretty good.
They have a really good podcast.
Yeah.
And their interpretation of this was a little bit different, and we'll get to that in just a second.
Yeah.
But here's the story. The story is the U.S. set up sort of this ground sonar in Alaska. And the reason was because, and this is during Herbert Walker Bush. So this is like G-Dub's dad, right?
Yeah, it's like in 92.
Right. So they set this up because the Russians and the Americans had come to this agreement where they would not do any kind of underground nuclear testing.
Mm-hmm. But
the Chinese, right?
Right.
They're like, yeah, we're not signing that.
Yeah.
And they've been developing nuclear weapons, and a lot of people don't realize this, as long as us.
Yeah.
So they have full capability of the same capability.
They just don't brag about it.
Right. But they have the same capability as the United States and Russia. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people think in some ways they may even be more advanced than us in nuclear weaponry.
Yeah. So
we kind of knew they were doing this, and we set up these. It's basically ground sonar, and it's a seismograph, but it measures shock waves along the lines of an earthquake, but it's more sensitive, and it's able to pick up underground explosions like a nuclear warhead.
Right.
And the Chinese set off this test, and when they did, there was this shock wave, and
geologist picked it up and thought it was an earthquake at first.
Right. And he came in and he looked at the data, and he saw that there was like this perfect pyramid anomaly.
Mm-hmm.
It's like west.
Well, they thought that when the Chinese detonated that nuke, they thought at first it was an earthquake, and then they realized what it was, that the Chinese had set off a nuke. But because of the detonation, the geologists used like the detonation as a excuse to use the seismographs to study the Earth's crust. And when they did that,
they found a pyramid anomaly.
Correct. It said,
and if you ever saw the actual graph, did you see that?
yeah,
It's a fucking pyramid.
right. Yeah.
I mean, as plain as day.
Yeah, and they even reportedly they said that they found a pyramid structure larger than Cheops, which is the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Right. And it is supposedly, like, I've seen twice as big and I've seen 4 times as big.
Mm-hmm.
But if that is the case, that is massive.
Yeah.
For it to be underground, especially.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this underground pyramid. There's a story that runs, and we'll get into this guy real quick, but there's a story that runs on the news and says that there's this underground pyramid. And this guy, his name is Muchler, I think I'm saying that right, is in the army at the time, and he's in intelligence. He's in counterintelligence, so he deals with like terrorism and
he was when at the time he did a interview with this Linda Howe. She's got 3 names. I'm not saying all 3.
Yeah.
Who is apparently a reporter and a cattle mutilation expert.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you go to school for that.
Well, I think it's like sad that exists. I don't know if it's sad for the cow or the person.
So her name is real quick. We'll say all 3. Her name is Linda Moulton Howe.
Yeah.
Okay. God, we'll call her Linda Howe. But you're okay. But like as much as I wanted to diss her.
I just thought it was funny that they put that in the title, and it just makes me sad to think that there's a necessity for that.
Well, yeah,
you know what I mean? Because you can deny what's going on, but cows have been mutilated. You know what I mean? That's not like a secret thing. They got pictures of that shit. That stuff's real. Who knows why or who did it or what happened, but
so she's kind of like around the earth, and God, I'm gonna destroy this. Gabogli Tepe. Can I say it right?
Good. You got it.
Gabegli Tepe, right?
Okay.
So she was kind of looking at this, and this is okay. So the Fertile Crescent is kind of like where life started. There's just been this recent discovery, Gabegli Tepe. I'm destroying it, but anyway, and it seems that there's actually developed civilization like twice as long as when the actual timeline for the Earth is. So she had been studying this. And she gets an email from this guy, and he says, when I was in the service, I heard this story, and I was based in Alaska, and I went to the news. He's like, I saw it with like 40 guys.
Yeah, Fort Richardson is where he was based. It was in like 2010 that base joined with the Elmendorf Air Force Base, become a joint base, but at the time he was saying that this event happened, it was Fort Richardson in Anchorage. Okay,
so he goes back to her and he says he went to the local news station that ran the story, and he's like, "Hey, I'd like a copy of that story." And they're like, "Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about."
Bum, bum, bum.
Right. And then he asked his family, who was like religious news people. They watched all the time. And he asked them about, if they had seen this story, if they had any idea, what the deal was. And they said they hadn't heard anything. So he goes to the actual station.
Apparently, because it was apparently just the one station. He called friends and family all around and like in different regions to see if they picked it up on their news feed. So they kept, if they reported, because that's like kind of big deal to report, you'd think it would hit. national.
Right. And this news station reports that there was this reading of underground shock waves that produced a pyramid-like anomaly underneath the Earth's crust, and it was 150 feet below surface, and the actual base of the pyramid was 900 feet below the surface. So if that gives you like a scale of like how big it was, whatever, pretty big. And I didn't understand if it was in like a cavern or whatever, but they had been studying it. When he went to the news station to get the copy of this thing, they say, yeah, it doesn't exist. But then he's pulled aside by like a junior engineer that's like, hey, we did run that story. So then he keeps like looking at it, and then he gets transferred. He gets transferred to Fort Meade.
Yeah.
And when he gets
the super secret home of the NSA.
Right. So he gets transferred. He gets transferred into like, into like mainland where there's real files of shit that exist.
Yeah.
And he says he goes to their archives and he says, hey,
looking for some light reading.
Right, exactly. Right. So he never says pyramid.
Right.
But he said, hey, I'm looking for like some underground structures in Alaska, and I want to see if you have anything on them. So the guy kind of like blows him off and says, yeah. It's been whatever. Gives him a number, and he goes back. And while he pulls out these bins and he starts leafing through them, and while he's going through them,
he actually came up on a couple that were about Alaska, but he didn't get a chance. Yeah, he was like right there where he found a couple things on Alaska,
because he gets Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones are like, hey.
Oh, why you guys putting on your sunglasses inside?
Yeah, right. And they're like, what are you doing? You can't look at these as they're sensitive. He's like, I'm just looking at files. I don't know what's the big deal. And they're like, yeah. And one of the guys slips and says something to the effect of, they don't want people nosing around about what's going on up there.
You're right. Yeah.
And he's like kind of caught off guard. And you might, if you're listening to this, this might be a little bit incomplete. So I'll just tell you what I told Brandon when I found this story. Tom DeLonge, do you know who he is?
Yeah.
All right. So if you don't, or if you think, yeah, that name sounds familiar, Tom DeLonge is one of the founding members of the pop punk band Blink-182. So they made a ton of money, and they broke up because they all started families or whatever. And what he did was he went on this quest to find UFOs.
Yeah.
And he did. He spent years.
I remember that, yeah.
He's still doing it. Like
yeah, he's big.
And he's become like a little bit of an expert in like UFOs and kind of like what the deal is. So what he came up with was that what in his mind, like, yeah, there's UFOs, yeah, like without a doubt, right. And there's aliens.
He's like
right?
the dude with the crazy hair on the History Channel or whatever.
Totally, but he also has all these other explanations, and what drew my interest. And dude, I'm all over stuff like this. I've never heard of this, right? But I came across this on Reddit, and he was doing an interview not long ago, like 2 weeks ago. And I guess it's called Pure Pleasure, and I've never listened to that podcast. But he's talking to the host, and this guy's name is Dewey Halpus. And here's what he says. He said, there's a lot of crazy stuff out there. He's like, yeah, aliens, yeah, UFOs, whatever. And the guy's like, well, like what? He's like, well, uh, there's a pyramid underground in Alaska, and they've been studying it for years. And the host is like, what?
Mm-hmm.
He's like, yeah, it's bigger than Giza. And apparently they discovered it after some kind of shockwave evaluation, whether it was an earthquake or like an atomic bomb or whatever. This geologist went in and found that there was this anomaly underground that was a perfect pyramid. And he's like, that's weird. And he's like, yeah, it's weird, but like it's on. And he's like, what do you mean it's on?
It's on.
He's like, well, they don't know, but it's generating some kind of force, whether it's like electric or whatever. And he's like, he's like, and this is my friend at the Pentagon, they think it's suppressing some kind of consciousness. And the host is like, what are you talking about? He's like, there's a pyramid underground in Alaska. It generates power, and it's somehow suppressing consciousness. And he's like, that's what this guy at the Pentagon said.
Yeah.
And the host is like, what? That's bizarre. So he kind of goes into how they found it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, but honestly, I don't know. He's like, I don't want to talk a lot of smack about it because I don't really know. Like, he was really vague about it. And
yeah,
he's like, but apparently, they sent somebody that worked for Bell Labs, and which is like Bell Labs became AT&T, and they're trying to figure out what this thing does.
Mm-hmm.
And so they went up there and they went into Alaska and they built a bunch of mine shafts, and I guess cleared it out so that they could study it.
Yeah, and which is I don't know. It's hard. It's like it sounds like you think about Alaska. It sounds like a lot of rock and snow. So
right.
I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine what it would be like. Maybe it was in a cave or a cavern, or
or maybe they created one.
Right.
And I don't know. I had the same wonder about exactly what you just said. Like, how did they go underground and study it?
Because you got other pyramids all around. There's pyramids all around the world. And
yeah, we'll get that.
We will. And they're like, when you hear that they're underground, because some of them are like they're hills, but it makes sense because it's like dirt. It's in the jungle. Leaves are going to fall and rot and create dirt, and it's going to get covered by it and stuff like that. But in Alaska, it's harder to picture in my head what that image looks like of a pyramid underground,
Right. And he kind of drifts off into this thing where he talks about, because I did listen to this, he drifts off into this thing about, things aren't linear. Mm-hmm. And he's like, that's the biggest thing people need to understand is things aren't linear. And the host really doesn't grasp this concept. And honestly, I didn't really either. But I guess what he was saying is that there's like parallel universes and you have multiple things happening at once. And that this is just part of that.
Mm-hmm.
But there it is. There was some sort of test, nuclear test, and the United States was like ready to study this, to be like, gotcha, China. And what they actually found was in Alaska, there's a pyramid buried underground, and it's on. And that's the only way it's been described is that it generates some power, and some people even suggest that it's powerful enough, this pyramid, to power all of Canada and most of the United States.
Right. Now also, Linda Howe, after her initial interview, she did, because she had a pre-recorded interview with Doug Muchler, and he later on she did another. She got an anonymous source. I hate that, but She had an anonymous source who was an adopted son of a retired Western Electric engineer.
Right.
And he reached out to her and confirmed like a bunch of that guy's story about the pyramid, because he said, now this is the weird part, is he said his father worked for Western Electric, and he was re-recruited by the Army to go work on this project in Alaska on this what they called the Dark Pyramid.
Yeah, it's called the Black Pyramid or the Dark Pyramid.
Yeah. So I think his son was saying that they were saying Dark Pyramid, but I could be wrong. But his father worked. Now here's the thing: he was a electrical engineer, and I think he was a physicist too. And he said he worked on a powerful electrical system emanating from a large underground pyramid of unknown origin in Alaska. But he says he did that between 1959 and 1961. Right. Which would be like, they were like, no, we've been pulling power from this thing for a while and testing it, you know? Right. So he would have been, and it didn't say he worked on the pyramid. It was like he worked on an electrical system that was emanating from the pyramid that was underground.
So that's where this is. There's a pyramid underground in Alaska, and it's on. It's on. And it's several times the size, whether it's 2 or 4, several times the size of the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's considered to be much older just because of where it's at than anything in existence. And as the guy from Blink 182 said, it may be messing with our consciousness.
Right. Suppressing it. I need to know the range on that.
So as of right now, there's like these guys guarding it. And a lot of people say they wear black uniforms and they hang around. They guard the perimeter while scientists are underground in these mine shafts that were built, studying it. So that's where we're at. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. Second, there are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. When people ask you, what do you do for a living? Do you want to be able to tell them, I'm a producer? Well, now you can. Go to patreon.com, search everything that's weird, and sign up. We'll list you in all the show notes and mention you in every episode. Go to patreon.com to get started today. Okay, so first of all, I didn't know this. Alaska is bigger than California, Texas, and Montana combined. Did you know that?
Yeah, it's huge.
I didn't realize it was that big. I knew it was big, but like California is big. Like you can, if you left San Diego and drove to Oregon, it would take you every bit of 20 something hours.
Yeah. From
San Francisco to Northern California is 11 hours.
Right.
Okay. That's no traffic, because once you get north of San Francisco, you hit a few like spots, but like it's mostly farmland.
Yeah, well, more people live in the state of California than the entire country of Canada.
Right. I believe that. I believe that. Because, I mean, like, greater Los Angeles alone is like, see, I don't want to mess it up because I live there. But I want to say it was like 10 million.
Mm.
And it's 40 in the state.
Yeah.
Is that right?
It's pushing 40. Yeah.
Okay, so there's 40 in the state, and like 10 million are in greater Los Angeles. So if you
I
go
want to
like
say it's like 38 right now. Don't quote me, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's big. So like, okay, just so when you say like just what I just said,
yeah,
they don't even have a state championship in California. They have 3. They have Northern, Central, and Southern.
Right.
Because it'd be ridiculous if you had to play somebody from Northern California and they were the best team and the best team was in San Diego. Each of you would have to drive 12 hours to go play a game. Right.
So they're plane.
Right, exactly. And that's the equivalent of driving to like Miami from Cincinnati.
Right.
Which is half so there's a little bit of map bias where you don't get the full magnitude of how big Alaska is. And when you say like how big it is, so 95% of it is uninhabited wilderness.
Right.
95% of California, Texas, and Montana combined is wilderness that has never been charted.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of maps that don't even chart this specific area.
Right.
And if they do, a lot of people say, well, it's just they just carry on. But as far as they know, this particular area has never been surveyed. And that's interesting because, Alaska becomes a state in 1959. Mm-hmm. And he said he worked on it in 59 to 61, right?
Right.
And, they're already marking off like their own Area 51. It's much smaller, but still.
Yeah.
It's like a no-go zone.
Right. It's like, what is it? Like, I think they said 50 miles west of Mount McKinley.
Right. Now, one of the issues with this being a pyramid, period, just whether or not it gives off
brain-numbing vibes
or electric or anything, right, is that it really fucks with the timeline of people. So it would supersede people on Earth by millions of years, correct? Like, some people have even put it to where if this was in fact built by people, if this was something that was like built by actually by people, that this would be 800 million years old, because the way it would go all the way back to like Pangea, when like everything was together. And you would have to like work on like plate tectonics and how the earth moves and churns and mixes up and whatever to get it to even get underground, right? Let alone 150 feet underground,
right? And unless it was built underground.
Then it's a whole other thing.
Could be brand new.
It could be built yesterday. Tom DeLonge could have built it.
Yep. It's a fucking house.
But when you get to like the parts of like pyramids, so it used to be, Joe Rogan has a really funny thing about pyramids. He said, I think, the Egyptians were wandering through the desert and they came across Egypt. And they're like, oh, yeah, we built this fucking pyramid. They
just claim it.
And they just claim it.
Yeah, that was us. We did that. We're pretty badass.
But honestly, like, that's not crazy.
That's not a crazy idea. There's a lot of pyramids in Egypt. I mean, there's so many. There's so many.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
And you know what? There's pyramids everywhere, and they're not all the same. But like, there's pyramids in America. Yep. There's pyramids in India. There's pyramids in Indonesia, and they keep finding them in the
Brazil,
Italy, right along the Amazon rainforest.
There's one in Las Vegas.
I lost a lot of money at that pyramid.
there's
at a
another
bachelor party.
There's another pyramid. Where is it at? I think it's in. God, is it in Tennessee? They built this big pyramid, and it was like a sports arena complex. All this stuff. At first.
Yeah, dude.
Right. Well, Bass Pro signed a 55-year lease.
You know,
so
you know,
it's a Bass Pro now.
So I just had somebody in from Nashville. Mm-hmm. So that was called. Is it called the pyramid? It was just called the pyramid.
I think something like that. It was.
And the Grizzlies played there. The Memphis Grizzlies played there.
Yeah.
Okay, it was called the Memphis. It was called the Great American Pyramid at one time.
Right.
And they said that's the coolest Bass Pro Shop. You can. So apparently you can rappel from the roof.
Right, like I heard, like it said, it's got all kinds of stuff like that. They call it the Memphis Pyramid now.
Right,
but it's got like shooting ranges and everything.
Yeah, and it was kind of like a dead space for a while because the Grizzlies got like a new arena or whatever. But now it's the best goddamn Bass Pro.
it's the baddest Bass Pro ever.
And I swear, this guy was like, I have to tell you, man. That is a really cool Bass Pro Shop. It better be. But like, so it's okay. It's called Göbekli Tepe. Is the correct pronunciation? Göbekli Tepe. So that's in Turkey, and it was originally thought that the Fertile Crescent was like the birth of civilization.
Right.
And not people, but like organized civilization. But then they found Göbekli Tepe, and it was buried for like...
Now, Turkey's... I mean, this is like old hat for Turkey. Turkey is always coming up with these geological sites that they find when they go to dig for something. Like there was that big major tunnel that went with the trains, and it was like a big collaboration with a bunch of countries to build this tunnel. And when it came to Turkey, the thing practically stopped for years because every time they dug forward, they found some new historic place. And they actually found like the oldest shipyard ever recorded, docks and boats. So they had to shut the whole thing down because it's like sense of national pride to be like, hey, look how old our country was civilized.
So I saw a National Geographic show in like 2000 when I was sitting on my couch, and I was like watching it, and it was about Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
And this guy got on and said it was like 1900. He was old. And he's like, my uncle said there's been a drought for 4 years. And we can see, and it was Noah's Ark. We can see the ship because there's been this drought, and the snow ice is, receded enough that it's exposed this boat. And he's like, him and his uncle took a hiking trip up Mount Ararat, and one of the mountaintops of Mount Ararat, and they found like Noah's Ark. And he said, he's like, and this is like early 1900s, and he's like, we messed around there for a minute, just kind of looked around, and he was describing it, and then he said, it started to snow, and he's like, so we started back down the hill. Well, to this day, like even the CIA and NSA and several like United States government agencies call it the Mount Ararat anomaly because they have like a picture,
satellite images,
right?
Yeah.
What they won't say it's Noah's Ark because you can't get funding for something like that in America. But they call it the Mount Ararat anomaly. So like you're right, Turkey's very, when it comes to like really old stuff, Turkey is kind of in the middle of all.
Yeah, they got a lot of the oldest civilization proof.
And you go like the Baghdad battery. So
yeah,
when we go like talk about this thing being on, so to speak, a lot of people think, a lot of historians think that the original pyramids were faced with like a white limestone,
right, capped with gold,
right, and they used something like, and if you don't know, it's called the Baghdad battery. They were like these clay pots that had a copper coil, and they used sheep and pig intestinal juices, like the acid,
right,
and they made batteries essentially.
Yeah,
that lit these things up.
Yeah, and I mean they got that. That's proof. There's proof of that. They found those batteries, and they are batteries.
Because they generate power.
To them.
Yeah. They tried, like they've had new archaeology students make them and generate power, and they do. They generate power. I don't know if it's enough to power Canada and most of the United States.
No, not even close. But they, and there's theories to that, to whether the Baghdad battery types, if they had a lot of use for them, like if they invented them, but they didn't have a lot of use for them, so they didn't get, they kind of got left by the wayside because they didn't have a lot of things to power per se.
So this thing is, they call it the Black Pyramid or the Dark Pyramid. It's underground. It's in a cavern or something that was either they cut it away. But what I heard from listening to a bunch of like these interviews with this Molten Howell lady was that Linda Molten Howell was that she said they had built a series of tunnels kind of to get around the base of it, but there was only one full face exposed. But then the rest of it, they were trying to find an entrance to this thing, and whether they did or not, we don't know,
right.
Or whether this is even a real thing, they don't really know. But like according to the story, that's what they were doing. Now, she gets a call from a lady who, I hate this. She does remote viewing, right?
Yeah.
And I don't believe in remote viewing, except to say that the government does.
Yeah, they stared at goats too.
Yeah, right? I don't believe in remote viewing, but the government does. They take it very seriously. The CIA, the FBI, the NSA, they all have like a division where this is like a tool that they use. And whenever I hear like homicide detectives like called a psychic, it pisses me off so bad. I'm like, God damn it.
Because you used to watch the show Psych.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I love that show. That was funny as shit to me.
But like, I think of like John Edwards. Remember that guy?
Yeah. I remember the South Park episode.
Yeah,
more than
right. Yeah, right. And that's true. He is the biggest douche. Like, he's just doing cold readings. That's all he's doing.
Yeah.
And playing on the emotions of people. And I've kind of always thought that about psychics. Now, I do think there's people that are psychic. Okay? It's just you can't hone it. It's probably something like
for me, the people that like the air quotes psychics, the people that are actually like legit to me, I think are just people that are hyper intuitive, that can see patterns and They don't realize they're seeing patterns, but conclusions come to them
Well, I think I
easier
told
than
you,
other people.
my grandma has like some kind of thing like that.
All right.
And my uncle was a pilot, and he was going to be an airline pilot.
Yeah, you told me that. Yeah.
Yeah, and she was like, he had like a rough landing in Oklahoma at Embry-Riddle, and she said, "Yeah, you can't fly anymore. You're gonna die. Like you can't be a pilot anymore because you're gonna die." And my uncle, his brother, died in Vietnam, and she knew the day he died. She woke up in the middle of the night. She's like, something happened. And my grandpa he was a Marine, and he's like, you know, I know you feel that way, but you know, he's okay. It's just, you know, we're just worried because he's there and there's a war. And sure as shit, like 2 weeks later, like they got visited.
Yeah,
and he died. So like, my uncle became an air traffic controller. Right. So like, he didn't take it lightly. He's like, oh well, okay, that's it. You know?
Okay, we're gonna stay on the ground.
Yeah, right. And so I do believe that there are people that are psychic or have like intuition, hyper intuition, as you would say. But yeah, when you're like, hey, who killed this guy and where are they buried? Yeah, that really, it's a problem for me. That's a problem for me. So the other thing is, you know, how old this thing is. Just from a geological standpoint, it's 150 feet underground.
Yeah.
So that's two things. Somebody had to bury it under 150 feet of stuff.
Right.
And we're from a nuclear waste place.
Yeah.
And they didn't even give us 150 feet. They just built a mound and gave us like 7 feet of topsoil.
Yeah. And some checks.
I didn't even get a check. But like, seriously, the amount of earth needed to move that you need to move to like bury something that deep, it would take forever, and to have it go unnoticed is like, that wouldn't happen.
It would have to be setting a record for the deepest pyramid.
Right. So then when they get to the age of it, I guess they're still trying to figure out the age of it, but like, you know, they keep pushing, you know, the timeline of humanity farther and farther back. They really do. And there's a book called The Brightest Star, and it's about archaeological anomalies. So like, for instance, there's like coal miners that have found like hammers embedded in coal that should be millions of years old. And like chains and like, you know, jewelry that you wear around your neck, like those kind of chains, which, you know, the timeline's all off. Like, you know, where we even get to the point where we're making jewelry, you know, is like not long ago, according to our archaeologist.
And I think that leads like to that the pyramid they discovered in Indonesia, the Gunung Padang. That one is kind of crazy because it looked like a hill to them, but there was these, you know, definitely like these stones up on top that are formed in certain ways that, you know, it looks like people did it, and they start nosing around on it. Well, when they realized that this thing was a pyramid underground, and then they realized the possibility of how old it could possibly be, that there was like one of the, like I was saying before, it's like that country's point of pride thing. They want to show that they're the earliest civilization. So they go digging, and they spared no expense. This is probably one of the most researched newer ancient pyramids found, you know, and Indonesia dumped like a ton of money into this because they and each layer of this thing is a different age.
Yeah, I've heard. So it took like almost like 9,000 years to build. right?
Well, here's the thing. It's the topmost layer, they believe, was like 600 BC.
Right.
And then it's like got 4 layers to it. And the second layer down was probably built like 3,500 years ago. And then 7,000 years ago. But then the controversy starts coming into play because they're digging deeper and deeper, and they're saying that the bottom layer,
like bedrock, right?
Yeah, it could be as old as 26 to 28,000 years old,
which is 10 times older than the Pyramid of Giza.
Right, and it's also like, That's I think the last great ice age was like 11,000 years ago.
Right.
So
that's kind of like what they were saying was that that this is kind of the issue. Like they're saying that there's this racial archaeologist bias, and it's because like these scientists come to study these things, and when they get to study them, they're like, well, our ancestors built them. And they're like,
right,
there's no way.
Yeah, and they're getting a lot of that out of this one. This one's, everybody's questioning everything they're doing, because they're saying, hey, you're getting too ahead of yourself. You're just too caught up in it being you guys and not like really looking at the facts, because they think their carbon dating for their lowest level is off, and they're just doing it so that they can say that they're, because there's so many things wrong with saying it's that old. I mean, it doesn't sound weird, I guess, to most people, but there's timelines there, and they're saying that there might have been like mortar in there with like iron in it that would predate the Iron Age.
Right.
So they were smelting iron long before anybody else was, which would make them super civilized. So like one of the things that knocks against how old the bottom layer of that pyramid could be is that about 30 miles away, they found a cave that the inhabitants, they dated back to about 7,000 years, and they were using bone tools. And they're like, how you can have this super civilization 30 miles away and they don't know about each other?
And it's India, it's Cambodia, it's South America, all over South America, all over the United States. Like, Serpentine Mountain, which is close to us, is believed to, and we're going to touch on that in another episode, but that's believed to be several thousand years old, which would predate
even the Clovis.
Right, yeah. I mean, that predates Giza. That predates the biggest pyramid.
But like here in the United States, especially in our area, our earliest is the Clovis people, but they were still hunter-gatherers. This is not that's what they think. Advanced civilization.
That's the thing.
Right.
And so this Linda Bolton Howard, she's kind of like the one person you come across all the time when you research this, but her big thing is, why not? Like, you have all these people that said they worked on it. Okay, is it weird? Absolutely. Does it give off power that we understand? Totally. But like, why is it not real?
Yeah.
And there have been several people that have gone looking for it that have gone missing. Now, here's a crazy stat. In Alaska, 500 to 2,000 people go missing every year. Do you know that?
Yeah.
God damn.
That area, the Alaskan Triangle, they call it.
Yep.
It's like, I was looking at it and I saw crazy numbers. I mean, crazy numbers of people missing. Total is like 16,000, over 16,000 people total missing since.
Right. Nuts.
It's crazy.
The 90s.
Yeah. Right. It's like, Jesus Christ, what the hell's going on?
And people go up there, and like this one guy, he was just kind of a young guy. He's in his 30s, and he's like, he was going to look for this, and he went to look for it. And when he went to look for it, he was never seen again.
Okay, so what if it is shutting off consciousness and there's just a bunch of people staring at rocks?
Roaming around, freezing to death.
Just freezing to death, staring at rocks, drooling.
Right. So there's like a whole far out theory that people think that this is used as like a gas station for UFOs. Have you heard this?
Recharging station. Well, I think it fits in line with the because I've heard so many theories about the pyramids in Egypt, and like when we were talking about what the outside used to look like, and it used to have a gold cap on it and stuff,
right?
And that the ship would come in and land on the top of it, and it would charge it, and then it would take off again. I've heard it about Egypt, but
it
just makes sense that it would
right trickle over,
yeah,
not down but over,
right.
But yeah, that's kind of one of the theories of why this thing is there, but apparently we knew about it a long time ago.
Yeah, if it's like anything like the Tesla charging stations that I've seen on the videos, then there would be like a line of spaceships waiting to charge.
Right. Right. They're like doing their crossword puzzle.
Sitting there playing Sudoku.
Right. Waiting for their turn. But yeah, that's what it is. There's all these theories about how this thing is even possible, and is it possible? Does it exist? And a lot of people, at least that I've come, there's not a whole lot of naysayers because it's sort of like this new thing. But like, I hate to say I believe the guy from Blink 182.
Right.
But like, he kind of said it in like a you have no idea what's out there type of way. Like his statement was very matter of fact, and he even said, okay, let's say it's not interplanetary, let's say it's not UFOs,
right?
He's like, but what you have to understand is that like string theory and like multiple universes and like, parallel events are real. He's like, and we've known that they're real for a long time. We just don't know what to do with it. He said, and that's kind of the explanation I could give to you, is that there's all kinds of stuff happening at one time, and it's less linear and more of like, not a multiverse, but more of like multiple realities happening at once. And in this one reality, there's a pyramid buried underneath the ground in Alaska.
So is that what maybe the suppression is, to suppress the consciousness from being able to visually see the other dimensions?
That's kind of what he's saying.
Because you hear about like those ayahuasca tours they do in like Central America, where they've taken like whole groups of people and gave them ayahuasca, and they all had like identical hallucinations in air quotes, because they're saying what they were really doing was seeing into a different dimension or maybe a parallel universe.
Sure. And that's kind of how he explained it in the interview, was that like, there's these multi levels of consciousness, and whether or not this thing suppresses that, it's irrelevant, because like, he's like, you shouldn't think of things linear. He's like, this is what everybody's told me. One thing I come across, when you say, are there aliens? They're like, okay, well, like, yeah, some of them are us. And he's like, what does that mean? And he's like, they're us from the future. He's like, some of them live here. And he's like, well, how come we never knew about them? He's like, well, we did know about them. Like, we've known about them throughout history. And then you get to like, the very human part of it, where like, they don't want anything like this to get out, because, okay, like, when I was young, I remember having a science test, and they said, I went to a Catholic school. What's the surface of Saturn? And the answer was rock and ice, right?
Yeah.
But like in reality, there is no surface of Saturn. It's like a gaseous planet.
They're gaseous planets.
So
Everything
it's like
now
a
past
liquid,
the asteroid belt is gaseous planets.
right? So it's like a liquid methane core type of thing. But like, what about
diamonds?
Right. And what about the kid that got it wrong, And, he was, I got it right because whenever I studied and that was the answer and I picked, but like.
You ever heard Nate Bargatze do his thing about the planets where he's talking about how Pluto, he's like, I don't believe in science. He's like, it's just easier not to.
I love Nate Bargatze. Yeah.
He said, when I was in school, he's like, first Pluto's a planet, now it's not a planet. He's like, make up your mind. He was like, I once got a C on my homework because I forgot to put Pluto in there. And turns out I should have got better than an A.
Yeah, right. He said, sometimes I get home late from the club and I'll make a sandwich and have something to drink and I'll sit down, and about a half hour later my wife will be like, Nate, he's like, you better hope to God it's me. Otherwise,
somebody got really comfortable in your house.
Yeah, I love Nate. He's good. All right, well let's see what we think.
All right.
When people ask you, what do you do for a living? Do you want to be able to tell them I'm a producer? Well, now you can. Go to patreon.com, search everything that's weird, and sign up. We'll list you in all the show notes and mention you in every episode. Go to patreon.com to get started today. All right, you want me to go first?
Sure.
So, I believe it. But here's why. There's a lot of stuff we can't explain. But my roommate, Paul, who's the same guy I was just talking about earlier, he would always, I am like, I don't watch like network TV. Yeah. I don't care. I do like, I like HBO television. Like, I'll watch The Sopranos, The Wire, Curb Your Enthusiasm. I do like Seinfeld. I like Seinfeld. But like, when it comes to like regular network TV, like especially reality TV, I don't care at all. I don't care about The Bachelor or The Bachelorette. None of it. I've never seen one episode.
I wouldn't call that TV.
Okay, well, I've never seen one episode of any of those. Even like The Big Bang Theory, the only reason I saw it, I was on a cruise one time and I was hungover and I started watching it. And I'm like, oh, that's a funny show. I like that show, right? So like, but I never. It's
one of the one shows I never watched. I used to get in. I watch a lot of TV.
Big Bang's good. You'd like that, but anyway,
that's what everybody says.
Yeah, but anyway, I don't care. Like I would much rather watch a documentary. If I'm going to sit there and veg out,
sure.
Like put stuff in my head.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
So I would always watch the National Geographic, Discovery, whatever.
Yep. And
History Channel. Well, History kind of changed its format and went kind of into this like aliens thing. And I'm down with aliens, but like, some of it's kind of ridiculous. So we were watching that Discovery, and we're just kind of hanging out, and he's just like, they don't know shit about anything. And I've heard comedians say, I think it may have been Nate Bargatze, he's like, I want to be a archaeologist because you can just be off by 1 billion.
Yeah.
He's like, they'll say.
Yeah. Well, who like got fired after that one?
Yeah, right. Turns out the Earth is 10 billion years old. Like, you were off by 9 billion.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like he used to always say, they don't know shit about it. And I kind of believe that. Like, when it comes to like proving whether the Bible was real or, the oldest text that we have, yeah, probably in some kind of context, it was real in some way.
Right.
It was either a real story or like they said, Moses was, or Noah was like 900 years old. Right.
Yeah.
And like, okay, like how did they count years? Did they count actual years? Or like I've heard where like, like scholars have said, well, they counted it as like wisdom.
Right.
Like in the amount of stuff that you knew.
Right.
You would be right.
Makes you wonder how big Goliath was.
Right. Well, we're doing a thing on giants.
Right.
But yeah, totally. That's been like, because, even though they know what a cubit is, somewhat, was David 5 foot tall?
Yeah.
And Goliath was 6'8"? Because that's really not that tall.
Right.
The guy that married me was almost 7 foot tall.
Right.
So, I do think there's like some sort of lost in translation when it comes to archaeology. You have all these people that have these really hard opinions, and they work for universities and they push a certain timeline that has to be that timeline. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. And when you come, the Last Star, that book, it talks about all these archaeology anomalies where, like, you have people that are completely ignorant to what they're actually doing, which is like an archaeology dig, like coal miners.
Well, the Iceman turned everything on its head, If you remember the Iceman, when he was trapped in the ice, he was way more advanced than they expected anybody to be. They didn't even know there was Homo sapien then. So
they have the La Brea Tar Pits is right in the middle of Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, it is right smack in the middle of the city of Los Angeles.
Right.
There are fucking tar pits with saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths that they they get all the tar off them and they're like perfectly preserved. But like one of the things that's crazy is there's always like they say that they hide skeletons of people because it doesn't fit in exactly when,
right,
and the period of when they should have been there. And how far down they are, and when
tools and all that stuff,
all that stuff, right? And that's always like a conspiracy. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, you take like something like this in Alaska. There's a pyramid underground.
Well, it's even like we said, and I can't remember what episode we said it in, but we were talking about, and you brought up your professor's story about where the guy comes in and shoots,
right?
And then 5 minutes later, people can't get the story right.
Right. It's totally true. Right.
So you're going to look at a book and tell a story from, thousands of years ago. It's just not.
Eyewitness account's the worst. Like it's absolutely the worst. But like, honestly, if you take something like that, if there is actually a pyramid underground, one of two things. It's either aliens put it there, which, okay, maybe. I don't know why they would put it. You would think they would just build it on top of the earth or put it in the ocean.
Right.
Or it is like an actual real structure. And it is part of like plate tectonics that actually buried it over earthquakes and, all this stuff that happens over, millions of years. And eventually it sinks 150 feet underground. Well, that's, the biggest earthquake ever happened in Alaska. It happened in Anchorage. And if you see pictures of their main street, it drops. Like the sidewalk is sometimes 25 feet higher than the storefront that it was in front of. You know what I mean? It's just like everything's just shifted around. And they ended up just kind of like leveling everything, filling everything in and starting over.
Yeah.
And they did that in San Francisco. And they did that in San Francisco when we were like in junior high or freshman, maybe. The A's played the Giants, and there was an earthquake, and it was like a big earthquake. And if you remember that, like most of San Francisco was like leveled. And my friend that I met in Los Angeles, he was running nightclubs out there, and he said, yeah, man, he's like, it was crazy. The whole entire walls were shifting. He's like, and the problem was they had a huge earthquake in 1913. They just kind of filled everything in and built on top of it. Well, it wasn't stable. So, like, you know, you figure if something like that is there and nobody even knows in the middle of Alaska because, you know, maybe the poles shifted. Maybe, like, the ice was in the equator and the warmer places were at the poles because the earth tilts. And if you throw a baseball, it spins a certain way and then the rotation turns. And, you know, we're essentially a baseball being thrown in space. Then why couldn't Antarctica and Alaska have been warm at one time and the equator have been cold? It's totally plausible for that to happen. And yeah, maybe there was a pyramid from a civilization that was built hundreds of millions of years ago, and it doesn't fit into like the timeline. And how do you explain it? You know, nothing about it. And yeah, I kind of think it's real. I kind of think it's real because everybody kind of had the same exact story about
take on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So whether or not it's of alien origin or creates some sort of power, I don't know. But I do know people are big on crystals, and they believe that crystals harness power, and pyramids are supposedly, you know, that's supposedly their power, their symbol of power anyway, is that they're, you know, they're perfect on all sides, and
the amount of quartz that's in them and all that.
Yeah. So I'm a believer.
Okay. I guess I'm kind of predictable too. I think it's probable, but for me, it doesn't exist right now. I mean, I want this story to be true and it to be something that is, like you're saying, not that something that got covered up, but that's something that was really, really, really old. Because I believe in my heart of hearts that not only was there a chance that this planet had an advanced civilization on it and some mass extinction event happened, and, you know, thousands of years passed by and the world kind of restarted itself.
I mean, well, like,
because I believe that it's honestly possible that Mars was inhabited and was a fertile planet, and that it went through its whole lifespan with an advanced civilization on it, and they figured a way to come to here. And it could be that old. Like, you know, we could be moving away from the sun and or the sun getting, you know, changing its temperature, it's getting, you know, bigger, and that Goldilocks zone changes over time.
Yeah.
So it's not out of the question to think that
where Venus is next.
Yeah. Or that it might be the other way around, that Venus was the start and that we've come to Earth, and now because we're moving to Mars.
Right.
You know, Elon Musk is going to make us Martians here soon. So, but for real though, I think there's a big open possibility of stuff we can't comprehend with our brain, how old something might be in our solar system, where life could have existed on another planet. That planet you see now is not what it was back in the day, because we can't even figure out what's on, you know, and I know there's a lot of science there that says certain things, but we can't even figure out the civilizations correctly on this fucking planet, let alone through the solar system. So for me, there could have been.
Well, there's such a different opinion on
Because
like,
my wife thinks that we were brought, like she's got an opinion of that we were put here, that we've been being messed with and our DNA and blah, blah, blah. And we're kind of like the thing. But for me, I think it stands a better chance that we were put here, but we put here by ourselves at some point. Even if life started over, if it was completely wiped out and started over.
Well, I mean, that's not crazy. Because, I mean, like, you take, Hiroshima, right?
Yeah.
And that was in a developed world. Mm-hmm. But, like, or you take this tsunami,
Right.
Imagine a tsunami hits in, like, a time before there's bulldozers and it shifts everything. People move away, and that's kind of like, what they're finding in Mexico and the Amazon and things like that. All of a sudden, everything's reclaimed by the earth.
Yeah. That's really
And
evident down there in Central and South America.
big time. They're saying that it's possibly the biggest metropolitan area ever constructed by man is in the Amazon, because they're finding like pyramids, buildings, dwellings of people that lived.
And what makes that what's so important about that is that you're talking pre-agriculture,
Right.
so to feed large populations, you have to have agriculture.
Right.
You have to. You can't. And the thing about that area is, even though you see all these plants, it's a jungle, right? There's jungles everywhere. Mm-hmm. But farm crops, a lot to plant agriculturally, a lot of plants don't grow in that. It's a super acidic soil. So it's hard to grow stuff like corn on like a big scale to support big communities. So they were doing it somehow, and that shows a level of advancement. So can you get by without agriculture? I don't think you can. I think they figured a way around it, though. I just don't think there's any remnants of their type of agriculture, whatever they were doing. So,
but even like something as simple as like a food court,
right?
They found a food court in Pompeii,
right?
No, I'm not joking at all.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
They found a mall
with like stalls
Pompeii.
and
Yes, it had stalls and it had these like kettle holes where they would put their kettle and they would light a fire underneath it.
Yeah, they're side by side by side. It's like there's no way these are dwellings. They're too small.
Right, and they were built literally as a food court for people to like just stop in and have a slice or some spaghetti at their Sparrow at fucking in Pompeii.
Fucking Sparrow. God, I miss that place.
I do too. But I'm with you. Because I put up when I sent you this, we were going to do another story, and you're like, yeah, let's do that one.
Right. Yeah, that's intriguing as shit. Because I don't know about the whole shutting off your consciousness and that it's on and all that stuff. Either. And I want to believe that there is a pyramid there, but right now the sources are shaky. Not all of them are identifying themselves, and not all of them can prove what they're saying. So it's hard for me to just grab hold of it and bite into it. But I want to believe it. I want some hard evidence to come out about it, because I want to know about it. And that's that point of pride thing falls short on America. It does not happen here.
Right.
This isn't where we came from.
Right.
So there's nobody, but they don't give a shit how old it is. Right.
What I mean?
Exactly. They're not gonna come out and tell it and be like, hey, look, it's not ours, but we found it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think they don't give a shit. And if they have purpose to it, they will hide it and not tell anybody if they can find some other use for it that they don't want people to know about. It's like that. It's like when we were talking about, I think maybe on the Area 51 or Bob Lazar one, where it's like they could have all this advanced stuff, that they're not given to the people just because they can't provide it to everyone.
Right.
So they keep it to themselves, and they're like, it's super useful to us. But if we tell the American people about it, everybody will want it. You know what I mean?
And what do you really do with this anyway?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
Right, to your point, like, great. It generates power. What, like,
right?
Everybody in Canada gets free power.
Right.
I mean, like,
well, that's some of the theory is that it's like a remnant of a Nikola Tesla invention.
Right.
I heard. So, which he did some crazy shit, man.
He did. He did.
He did some crazy stuff.
He did.
But yeah, I want to believe it. I want it to happen, but I don't think it's happened. I don't think it's time to say anything about it right now, because it's just too shaky for me of a story. It's not like when they found the pyramid in Indonesia and they like stopped everything and spared no expense.
Right.
You know what I mean? Even if they're lying about the timelines, they at least are showing you all the fucking stuff. You know what I mean?
Right.
And there's no reason why some other scientists couldn't go to that site and even check it out, because it's common public knowledge. So, and the stuff like that in Turkey, they take their stuff serious too, because, you know, that's their stuff. They're like, these are Turkish people.
Right.
So, you know, the indigenous white people. I don't know if you want to say that. But yeah, there are.
We were bred like bulldogs.
We appeared in the Caucasus out of the mist, out of the ether.
We did.
Right. So there's the Sami people up in the Norway and stuff.
I know. Like, the Vikings were here long before everybody.
Yeah. The Sami are old, and they even get. There's like, they just said that like in 2012 they had to sign, like, Norway had to put into law an anti-discrimination law about Sami being treated bad, and I'm like, oh, them poor cold white people. You know, somebody needs to help them. Just joking. Anyway, I want to believe this story, but it's just there's not enough there yet for me. There's just not, you know. I don't know if let's try it there. Where are you? I don't know if I'm on board with him yet.
Yeah, but you know what? I don't know, man. I kind of think like there's all kinds of things like this, and we just don't understand it. And then in the easiest way is like Cartman in South Park is just to hit it with a stick.
Yeah.
Right. And that seems more human. But it's all right. I think we're both kind of like, I do think there's something there, whether it's to what they're saying it is, I don't know, but like it's pretty probable, and I think you're pretty much on board.
Yeah, I want this to be true, so I hope something comes out with it. With it more on it. I don't think it's like emanating energy, but I would like to hear about it, like what it really is and what's going on there.
Me too.
Because it's like, I'd love to hear it go the other way, where it's like the extraterrestrial, like, we didn't do this. There's no way we did.
Right.
Even if it's not on.
Or just like, hey, that weird thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? Coal actually sometimes deposits itself as giant pyramids.
Well, there is some weird stuff when you see volcanic activity does these weird flutes sometimes that are like octagonal beams that they look like pillars. It's so crazy. It looks like honeycombs. So
yeah, totally.
So you never know. And you ever been out to Putin Bay?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you ever go on the cave tour and go see that crystal cave?
No, that sounds awesome though.
There's like a winery there, and you go down. It's just a tiny little cave, but when you go down the basement of this winery, it's in this crystal cave, and like all the crystals all over the wall all have like the same facet dimensions.
Oh, that's cool.
Whether they're big or small, it's always the facets are always
they all grew the same way.
They're always mathematically the same.
Oh, that's a trip.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So that's pretty cool, and like that happened in nature. So,
So maybe it's just something weird.
It could be. It could be just something that's weird.
All right, probable.
Probable for me.
All right. I'm Anthony.
I'm Brandon.
And this is Everything That's Weird. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. Second, there are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.